the Japanese fighter was less than half a mile away. Its wings barely moved as it dropped toward the destroyer, its pilot committed to a mission he had no intention of surviving. Around the ship, every anti-aircraft gun erupted in a wall of fire. Brass cartridges bounced across steel decks, smoke mixed with salt spray. Orders echoed through loudspeakers. Then one gun went silent, not because it had run out of ammunition, not because its crew had been killed. It simply stopped. A jammed bolt had turned one of the destroyer's last lines of defense into several 100 pounds of useless steel. The gun captain pulled the charging handle again. Nothing. Again, still nothing. With every passing second, the aircraft grew larger. Then, over the noise of battle, someone shouted words no sailor expected to hear in the middle of a kamikaze attack. "Get the cook!" It sounded ridiculous. A cook wasn't trained to repair automatic weapons. He wasn't an armorer. He wasn't a gunner. Yet less than 2 minutes later, that silent gun was firing again, because of something taken from the ship's own galley. How could kitchen grease succeed where military equipment had failed? To answer that, we have to sail back to one of the deadliest days in the Pacific War. April 6, 1945, the Battle of Okinawa had entered one of its most brutal phases. American destroyers were stationed far from the main invasion fleet as radar picket ships, acting as floating early warning stations. Their mission sounded simple: spot incoming Japanese aircraft before they reached the fleet. In reality, it made them the first targets. Every radar contact meant another wave of enemy planes heading directly toward the ships that stood furthest from help. The crews knew it. So did the Japanese. On board the fictional destroyer U.S. Escalder, inspired by the experiences of several real radar picket destroyers, general quarters had been sounding for hours. More than 300 sailors waited at battle stations, knowing that somewhere beyond the horizon, another attack was already forming. At 3:12 in the afternoon, radar operators detected 11 incoming aircraft. Minutes later, lookouts confirmed the worst. Several were kamikazes. Unlike conventional attacks, these pilots weren't trying to survive. Their aircraft had become guided bombs, carrying fuel, explosives, and a pilot determined to crash directly into an American warship. Against that threat, every gun mattered. The destroyer's powerful 5-inch guns could engage targets at long range. The 40mm Bofors guns took over as enemy aircraft closed in, but inside the final 1,000 yards, the burden fell on the fast-firing 20mm Oerlikon cannons. They were the ship's last shield. Lose one, and a dangerous gap opened in the wall of defensive fire. No crew wanted to discover what could fly through that gap. Unfortunately, one of those guns had already begun showing signs of trouble. Its crew had noticed the action becoming sluggish after long watches in cold sea spray. They cleaned it, lubricated it, checked it again. Everything appeared normal, until the exact moment they needed it most. As another diving aircraft emerged from the clouds, Mount 52 fired a short burst, then locked solid. The bolt refused to move. The loader stared in disbelief. The gun captain tried again. Nothing. The standard solution required a complete cleaning and fresh lubricant. It also required time, the one thing the crew no longer had. Because the Zero wasn't slowing down, it was getting closer. And somewhere else aboard the destroyer, a Navy cook remembered a conversation everyone else had laughed at. That forgotten memory was about to become the difference between a silent gun and one more chance to survive. Ship's cook, 3rd class Thomas Reyes, had never expected to become part of a gun crew. He had joined the Navy to feed sailors, not fight aircraft. Before the war, Reyes spent more than a decade in his uncle's meatpacking business near Corpus Christi, Texas. Every winter, he helped render beef tallow, slowly heating animal fat until it became a smooth liquid before cooling into a stable cooking grease. It was dirty work, but it taught him something few people outside the trade ever noticed. Not every lubricant behaved the same in the cold. Some oils thickened quickly. Rendered animal fat often stayed surprisingly slick, even after long hours in unheated storage. To Reyes, it was simply knowledge from another job. He never imagined it might matter aboard a destroyer. Life at sea followed a routine. Long before dawn, the galley came alive. Coffee brewed, bread baked. Bacon hissed across hot griddles while the rest of the ship prepared for another day at war. During quiet moments, Reyes wandered the weather deck, carrying meal trays to sailors still on watch. That was how he became fascinated by the gun crews. He watched gunners' mates strip Oerlikon cannons into neat rows of springs, bolts, and locking pieces. He listened as they complained about the same problem over and over again. The salt, the powder residue, the cold spray. Together, they turned the issued lubricant into a sticky paste that made the guns harder to cycle after extended firing. The armorers followed procedure perfectly. The problem wasn't poor maintenance. It was that the Pacific Ocean didn't care about procedures. One afternoon, weeks before Okinawa, Reyes watched gunner's mate, second-class Walter Piotrowski, cleaning Mount 52. The gunner slammed the bolt onto the workbench in frustration. "This thing feels like it's glued shut." Without thinking, Reyes answered, "The grease we use in the galley doesn't do that." Piotrowski looked up. "What grease?" "The rendered beef fat." The gunner laughed. "You want me to lubricate a Navy cannon with cooking grease?" Nearby sailors laughed too. The idea sounded absurd. Military weapons used military lubricants. Cooking fat belonged in the kitchen, not inside an automatic cannon. The conversation should have ended there. Instead, Piotrowski's curiosity got the better of him. Late one evening, after routine maintenance was complete and no officers were watching, the two men performed a tiny experiment. Nothing official, nothing authorized. They cleaned two spare bolt assemblies. One received standard gun oil, the other received a thin coat of rendered tallow from Reyes's coffee can. Both remained outside overnight, exposed to cold wind and salt spray. The next morning, Piotrowski cycled them by hand. The oil-coated bolt felt noticeably stiffer. The tallow-coated bolt moved with surprising ease. Neither sailor claimed they had discovered a miracle. It was only one test, on one night, under one set of conditions. No responsible gunner would replace Navy-issued lubricant based on an experiment that small. So they cleaned the parts again, put everything away, and returned to their duties. The incident faded into memory. Until April 6. By the spring of 1945, American destroyers off Okinawa faced attacks unlike anything the Navy had experienced earlier in the war. Wave after wave of kamikaze aircraft descended with a single objective to hit ships, regardless of the cost. Radar picket destroyers stood directly in their path. Many absorbed repeated attacks before larger ships even saw the enemy. The statistics were grim. Dozens of U.S. Navy ships had already been sunk, and many more damaged during the Okinawa campaign. Every sailor understood the mathematics of survival. If one anti-aircraft gun stopped firing, the remaining guns had to cover a larger section of sky. That meant more pressure, more ammunition, more opportunities for a single aircraft to slip through. No captain wanted that responsibility. No gun crew wanted that burden. And yet, when Mount 52 seized in the middle of battle, there was no approved emergency procedure capable of putting it back into action within seconds. Doctrine called for cleaning, inspection, replacement of lubricant, reassembly, excellent instructions, if the enemy could be persuaded to wait. But kamikaze pilots never waited. As the Zero continued diving toward U.S. Escalder, Piotrowski stared at the frozen bolt. Then he remembered something almost everyone else had forgotten: a Navy cook, a coffee can, and an experiment everyone had laughed at. The next 90 seconds would determine whether that strange memory became an embarrassing joke or the most important idea anywhere on the ship. The range closed fast. 600 yards. The ship shuddered as its 5-inch guns fired another salvo. Fragments burst around the diving Zero, but it kept coming. 500 yards. Mount 52 was still silent. Piotrowski pulled the charging handle again. The bolt refused to move. There wasn't enough time to strip the weapon completely. There wasn't enough time to find replacement lubricant. There wasn't enough time for anything except one desperate gamble. Reyes. The cook looked up. He didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the galley hatch, disappearing below deck while shells exploded overhead. Around him, cooks flattened against bulkheads as the ship rolled violently through evasive turns. Reyes reached the familiar coffee can sitting near his workstation. Inside was rendered beef tallow saved for cooking, not combat. He grabbed it and ran. Back on deck, Piotrowski had already opened the weapon as far as he safely could without a full disassembly. The loader kept calling out the range. 400 yards. Every voice sounded louder than the last. Reyes thrust the can toward the gunner. No speeches, no debate, no discussion about regulations. Piotrowski scooped the soft tallow with his fingers and worked it into the bolt rails and locking surfaces. One pull. Nothing. A second pull. The bolt lurched. A third. It slammed fully forward. The gun had come back to life. Piotrowski dropped into the sights. He squeezed the trigger. The Oerlikon roared. Its familiar rhythm shattered the panic that had gripped the crew only seconds before. Tracer rounds reached toward the incoming aircraft. The Zero crossed through the stream of fire. Hits appeared along one wing. Then another. Smoke poured from the engine. The aircraft rolled sharply to port before crashing into the sea just off the destroyer's bow. A towering column of water and burning fuel erupted into the air. The explosion shook the ship. But the deck remained intact. No aircraft struck the hull. No bomb exploded among the gun crews. For one terrifying minute, the difference between disaster and survival had been measured in seconds, and in a coffee can from the galley. When the battle ended, sailors did what sailors have always done. They cleaned the guns, collected spent shell casings, counted ammunition, checked for damage, and remembered the friends who had not been as fortunate aboard other ships. Radar picket destroyers around Okinawa paid a terrible price during the campaign. Many absorbed repeated kamikaze attacks. Some were left burning, others never returned. Against that backdrop, an improvised repair on a single 20-millimeter cannon seemed almost too small to matter. Even so, Piotrowski included it in his after-action notes. The report briefly described an unofficial substitute lubricant taken from the galley after standard gun oil was unavailable. There was no recommendation to rewrite Navy doctrine, no demand to issue beef tallow across the fleet, only a simple record of what had happened during one extraordinary afternoon. By the time the paperwork moved through the chain of command, the war was entering its final months. Engineers were already developing better synthetic lubricants designed to withstand the harsh conditions that had plagued naval weapons throughout the Pacific. The Navy solved the problem through science, not through cooking grease. Rendered animal fat never became official issue. It never appeared in maintenance manuals, and perhaps it never needed to, because the value of that desperate improvisation wasn't that it changed naval engineering. It was that it bought a fighting crew 90 seconds they otherwise didn't have. Sometimes, history doesn't turn, because someone invents a revolutionary new machine. Sometimes it turns because an ordinary person notices something everyone else ignores. A mechanic remembers a sound. A medic remembers a lesson. A welder trusts his hands. Or a cook remembers how grease behaves on a cold morning. Those moments rarely earn medals. Often, they barely earn a sentence in an official report. Yet they remind us that wars are not won by equipment alone. They are won by people willing to think under impossible pressure. Thomas Reyes returned home after the war as he had served it quietly. No famous headlines, no celebrated speeches, just another veteran among millions who carried extraordinary memories without expecting recognition. Whether or not history remembers every name, stories like these reveal an enduring truth. The difference between survival and tragedy is not always firepower. Sometimes it's the person everyone else overlooked. If you enjoyed this story, don't stop here. The Pacific War is filled with incredible moments where ordinary sailors made extraordinary decisions under impossible circumstances. Click the next video in this playlist to discover another forgotten WWII story that deserves to be remembered. And if you enjoy deeply researched military history told through cinematic storytelling, consider subscribing so you never miss the next episode.